Nobody noticed when it happened. There was no announcement, no controversy, no moment that made people stop and say animation would never be the same. But this was the exact point when Adventure Time quietly changed animation forever. Not with spectacle, not with shock, but by breaking a rule cartoons were never supposed to break. And most people watched it without realizing what they were seeing. The world before the change. For decades, cartoons operated under an unspoken agreement with the audience. No matter what chaos unfolded in a single episode, everything would reset by the end. Emotions returned to baseline. The consequences disappeared. Characters went back to exactly who they were before. You could watch stories out of order and lose nothing important. Pain was temporary. Fear was cosmetic. Growth was optional, not expected. Even when cartoons experimented with heavier themes, that seriousness always had an expiration date. By the next episode, the world would snap back into place as if nothing had happened. This was not a weakness of the medium, it was its foundation. That reset button is what made cartoons feel safe, predictable, and endlessly rewatchable. They were designed to comfort, not to linger. When Adventure Time first appeared, it seemed to follow those same rules. The show was drenched in bright colors and absurd humor. Jokes were random, stories felt loose and interchangeable. Installments could be shuffled without consequence. On the surface, it looked like just another imaginative cartoon built for chaos and laughs. A world meant to entertain and then disappear once the credits rolled. But that surface was misleading. Beneath the silliness, something else was slowly taking shape. The show was laying groundwork quietly, without drawing attention to itself. It was patient, subtle, almost invisible at first. Adventure Time did not rush to reveal what it was becoming. Instead, it waited for the right moment to let that foundation shift, so quietly that most people never noticed it happening at all. Why Adventure Time felt different without explaining why. Adventure Time never announced that it was changing animation. It did not pause to explain itself, and it never lectured the audience about what it was doing differently. The show did not slow down, break its tone, or draw attention to any kind of creative shift. Instead, it hid its evolution inside structures that already felt familiar and safe. Stories were still silly. The humor still landed. The pacing remained loose and playful, exactly what viewers expected from the series. On the surface, nothing seemed different, and that was precisely why most people did not notice that the emotional logic of the show was quietly changing underneath the jokes. Characters began to remember things, not just plot details, but emotions. Small moments stopped disappearing when the episode ended. Regret lingered instead of being erased. Awkwardness stayed uncomfortable instead of resetting back to normal. Interactions began to carry emotional weight over time, even when the story itself appeared self-contained. Adventure Time never abandoned comedy, but it did abandon the idea that emotions were disposable. Feelings were allowed to exist beyond a single punchline. And without ever calling attention to it, the show reached a moment where that shift fully settled into place. One episode quietly locked in the change, redefining what cartoons could get away with from that point forward. That moment came in the episode What Was Missing. On paper, this episode does not look revolutionary at all. There is no dramatic transformation that reshapes the world. No shocking death meant to stun the audience. No permanent visual change that signals something important has happened. Everything about it appears restrained, even ordinary, especially when compared to moments that usually mark turning points in animation history. What makes the episode different is far more dangerous to the traditional cartoon formula. It allows an emotional consequence to exist without resolving it. There is no joke to soften the impact. No lesson spelled out for the audience. No reset button to return everything to normal by the time the credits roll. Instead, a character makes a choice, and that choice hurts someone else in a way that is not repaired. The most important detail is that the hurt is allowed to remain. It is not cleaned up or explained away. That was the line cartoons were never supposed to cross. Because once an emotion is left unresolved, it creates memory, and memory creates continuity. The episode ends, but the feeling does not. The discomfort lingers past the final scene. Nothing explodes. Nothing announces that a rule has been broken. Yet quietly, without spectacle or warning, the rules have already changed. So why did nobody notice when this shift happened? Because Adventure Time was smart enough to camouflage the change. On the surface, the story still looks like any other. The jokes land. The pacing feels familiar. The art style remains consistent. Nothing visually signals that something important has just occurred. More importantly, the show never tells the audience how to feel about what happens. There is no emotional underline guiding the reaction, no speech explaining the lesson, no clear signal that the moment should be treated as significant. The discomfort is subtle, quiet, and easy to ignore. And if you choose to ignore it, the story still functions perfectly as entertainment. That is why it slipped past so many viewers. Adventure Time trusted the audience to feel something without explaining it. It assumed emotional intelligence rather than demanding attention. Many people laughed, enjoyed the story, and moved on without realizing anything had changed. But the animation industry noticed. Because once you prove that an audience will accept emotional permanence without being instructed to do so, the door never closes again. From that point forward, the rules are different. After this episode, Adventure Time does not suddenly become darker. Instead, it becomes deeper. The shift is not about tone, but about weight. Emotions begin to stack instead of resetting. Feelings carry forward. Relationships grow more complicated instead of remaining static. Even jokes start to leave behind emotional aftershocks. Moments that land differently because of what came before. What is important is that other shows begin to follow this logic as well. Not by copying Adventure Time's art style, humor, or structure, but by copying something far more important. It's permission. Permission to let stories matter beyond their runtime. Permission to let characters remember what happened to them. Permission to allow discomfort to exist without immediately fixing it or explaining it away. Slowly, animation begins to shift. Cartoons move away from pure episodic amusement and toward emotional continuity. Stories start trusting viewers to carry memory forward. And because this change happens gradually, many people credit the wrong moment. They point to later seasons, later shows, or later trends as the turning point. But by then, the foundation was already in place. The contract between cartoon and viewer had already changed, quietly and permanently. Here is the rule Adventure Time broke. Cartoons were never supposed to make the audience responsible for emotional memory. Traditionally, the show carried that burden itself. Stories reset so viewers did not need to remember what characters felt before. Every narrative began fresh, regardless of what had happened previously. Adventure Time quietly changed that contract. Instead of resetting emotions, it transferred that responsibility to the viewer. If you remembered how a character felt earlier, the moment hit harder. The scene carried more weight, but if you did not remember, the story still worked. Nothing broke. The experience remained accessible. That flexibility was revolutionary. It allowed casual viewers and dedicated fans to exist side by side without punishing either one. Attention was rewarded, but it was never required. The show did not demand homework. It offered depth as an option rather than a barrier. This balance is what changed everything. It proved that cartoons could respect their audience's emotional intelligence without sacrificing clarity or enjoyment. From that point on, animation no longer had to choose between being meaningful and being approachable. Adventure Time showed that it could be both at the same time. Adventure Time did not change animation by becoming darker. It changed animation by redefining continuity, not plot continuity. Emotional continuity. The show proved that cartoons could let feelings persist without collapsing under their own weight. It proved that humor and sadness did not cancel each other out. They could amplify each other. And once that rule was broken, animation could never fully return to the old model. Because audiences had tasted something deeper. Not louder storytelling, not edgier storytelling, but more honest storytelling. This is why this episode still matters today. Nearly every modern animated series that balances humor with emotional weight is building on this quiet shift. They may look different and target different audiences, but they all rely on the same broken rule. Emotions can last, characters can remember, and stories do not need to reset to stay accessible. Adventure Time did not change animation overnight. It changed it quietly and patiently inside an episode that looked harmless. So the next time you rewatch the series, pay attention not to the big moments, but to what does not reset. That is where the real shift happened. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more deep dives into animation and storytelling, and let me know in the comments which story you think changed cartoons forever. I will see you in the next one.